Well, brothers and sisters, it's been a marvelous time of worship so far. So glad to be together with you today. And I want to invite you now to turn with me in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 28. Exodus 28. If you'd like to use the pew Bibles there in front of you, you're more than welcome to use those. You'll find our passage begins on page 68 of those. Exodus 28. I want to remind you that by this point in the book of Exodus, Moses has gone back up onto Mount Sinai, where he will be for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving instruction from the Lord. As we saw last week, he receives architectural plans for building God's tabernacle. And then this week, what we're going to see is that he also receives plans for designing the clothing of the priests who would serve in the tabernacle. Plans for how all the priests were to dress, but with a particular focus, as we'll see this morning, on the high priest, the leader of the priests, the very man who would go into the Holy of Holies one day a year on behalf of the people. His clothes were to be elaborately designed to specific specifications. I want to read a bit of it for you in chapter 28. We'll read selective portions here, and then we'll dive in. So, Exodus 28, beginning in verse 1. God says this to Moses: "Then bring near to you Aaron and your brother and his sons with him from among the people of Israel to serve me as priests. Aaron and Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. And you shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother, for glory and for beauty. You shall speak to all the skillful, whom I have filled with a spirit of skill, and they shall make Aaron's garments to consecrate him for my priesthood. These are the garments that they shall make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a coat of checkered work, a turban, and a sash. They shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother and his sons to serve me as priests. They shall receive gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, and fine twisted linen. And they shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, scarlet yarns, and of fine twisted linen, skillfully worked. It shall have shoulder pieces attached to its two edges, so that it may be joined together, and the skillfully woven band on it shall be made like it, and be of one piece with it, of gold, blue, purple, scarlet yarns, fine twisted linen. You shall make 2 onyx stones, and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel, 6 of their names on the one stone, and the names of the remaining 6 on the other stone, in the order of their birth. As a jeweler engraves signets, so you shall engrave the 2 stones on the names of the sons of Israel. You shall enclose them in settings of gold filigree, and you shall set the 2 stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel. And Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord on his 2 shoulders for remembrance. You shall make settings of gold filigree and 2 chains of pure gold twisted like cords, and you shall attach the corded chains to the settings. You shall make a breastpiece of judgment in skilled work. In the style of the ephod you shall make it, of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, and fine twisted linen you shall make it. It shall be square and doubled, a span its length, a span its breadth. You shall set in it 4 rows of stones. A row of sardius, topaz, and carbuncle shall be the first row. The second row, an emerald, a sapphire, a diamond. The third row, a jacinth, an agate, an amethyst. The fourth row, a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They shall be set in gold filigree. There shall be 12 stones with their names according to the names of the sons of Israel, and they shall be like signets, each engraved with its name for the 12 tribes. Now the text goes on with some detail, but skip down to verse 29. So Aaron shall bear the names of the sons of Israel in the breastpiece of judgment on his heart, when he goes into the holy place to bring them to regular remembrance before the Lord. And in the breastpiece of judgment you shall put the Urim and Thummim, and they shall be on Aaron's heart when he goes in before the Lord. Thus Aaron shall bear the judgment of the people of Israel on his heart before the Lord regularly. You shall make a robe of the ephod of all blue. It shall have an opening for the head in the middle of it, with a woven binding around the opening, like the opening in a garment, so that it may not tear. On its hem you shall make pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and around its hem with bells of gold between them. A golden bell and a pomegranate around the hem of the robe. And it shall be on Aaron when he ministers, and its sound shall be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord, and when he comes out, so that he does not die. And you shall make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it, like the engraving of a signet, holy to the Lord. And you shall fasten it on the turban by a cord of blue. It shall be on the front of the turban. It shall be on Aaron's forehead. And Aaron shall bear any guilt from the holy things that the people of Israel consecrate to their holy gifts. It shall regularly be on his forehead, that they may be accepted before the Lord. Let's stop there. You know, clothing communicates things. Isn't that true? Clothing communicates. I mean, think about just how much is communicated by, say, a general's uniform, right? Think about all of those awards and medals and how they communicate his rank and his status. Oftentimes, one's profession is communicated by their clothes. This next picture shows someone. What does she do for a living? Well, of course, she's a nurse, and we know it by her clothes. I think of a businessman who dresses up in a suit and tie to communicate a sense of professionalism in the industry. Or perhaps you think of a prince and princess, how they dress in such a way to show their glory. A rock star dresses like a rock star. I mean, you know that's Bono, but even if you didn't know that was him, you'd still know it's a rock star by how they dress. Or think of the difference between how a Roman Catholic clergyman dresses versus a hipster evangelical pastor like Mark Driscoll, right? The way these men dress speaks to their aims in ministry. Okay, so if clothing speaks, then we should not be surprised to see that God has some very specific instructions in Exodus 28, which we just read, for how the high priest was to dress as he led the other priests in the worship and presence of the most holy God. Let's take a quick look at what we just read, but in visual form, as you can see from this diagram. First, we learned that the high priest is dressed in a white tunic, finely woven fabric, linen. Over that tunic was a blue robe, as you see here. Interestingly, attached to the bottom of the robe were a series of bells so that you could always hear the high priest as he worked in the tabernacle. It was an act of respect to God. You don't approach the presence of a king unannounced. Those bells announced his presence. Notice next you'll see something called an ephod. It was like a large vest that draped over the front and back of the priest. It had all kinds of beautiful colors weaved in. And on this ephod, particularly on its shoulders, keep in mind that there were two large stones placed. We'll come back to that in a moment. Next, I want you to see that there is something called the breastpiece of judgment. It was made of the same materials as the ephod. It was folded over to form something of a pocket. Inside of that pocket was placed the Urim and Thummim, which you can think of as a set of dice used, as we'll come back to in a moment, to determine the will of God. Well, those were placed in that pouch. And the breastpiece also contained, as you'll note, 12 separate, distinctive, and unique stones, jewels. Finally, we see that the priest was to wear a turban with a gold plate attached to his forehead, which read, "Holy to the Lord." All right, so I know what you're thinking at this point. Who cares? So what? Like, what's this all about? Why does this matter, what the priest wore? Well, here's why. Because the Bible makes it crystal clear that the high priest in Israel ultimately points us to Jesus Christ and all that he will do for us as our great high priest. So if we can figure out what's going on here with this high priest, we can find clues that will help us understand how Jesus ministers to us even today. So here's what I want to do this morning. Let's take a look at three things that Jesus does as our great high priest in fulfillment of what the Israelite high priest did for Israel. Three things. First, Jesus represents God to his people. Jesus represents God to his people. The Israelites' high priest represented God to them. You say, how so? Well, first of all, because he wears the colors of God. Look, when you go to your some football game of your favorite team and you wear their colors? You dress in their colors and you paint your face and you do all kinds of obnoxious stuff cheering for your team in the stands. What are you doing in that moment when you wear their colors? You, for better or for worse, are representing your team, right? Well, the high priest wore the colors of God, and therefore he represented God to the people. Remember the fabrics of that ephod that were mentioned again and again in our text? Look back at verse 6. It says, "And they shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, and purple, and scarlet yarns, and of fine twisted linen skillfully woven." What's the deal with all these fabrics? Well, these are the exact same colors that were woven into the fabric of the inner curtain of the tabernacle. In other words, the clothing of the high priest looked just like the tabernacle itself. It's almost like he was an extension of the tabernacle, and therefore he's an extension of everything the tabernacle represented, namely the presence of God. Through his clothing, by wearing God's clothing, by wearing God's colors, the high priest represented God to the people. And there's a second thing here. You'll remember those weird dice I was telling you about called Urim and Thummim. Look there in verse 30. "And in the breastpiece of judgment you shall put the Urim and Thummim, and they shall be on Aaron's heart when he goes in before the Lord." You say, what were these? Well, these were like ancient dice, which apparently you could roll them and they could give you an answer, yes or no, depending on what answer came up. And there was a sacred responsibility of the high priest to use these dice on special occasions of national interest. And so, for instance, the king could come and say, "I'm not sure whether God wants us to go attack those enemies or to hold back." And he could come to the high priest, who could then pull out these holy dice, roll them before the Lord in order to discern God's will, and then bring God's will out to the people. In this way, the high priest represented God's will. Do you see? So he represents God to the people. All right, well then, taking a step back from that, let's connect all of this to Jesus. Do you realize, brothers and sisters, Jesus Christ, as the ultimate high priest, he fully represents God to us. Jesus himself said in John 14:9, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." In other words, Jesus wears God's colors. Colossians 1:15 says, "He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God." You want to see the invisible God? Look at Jesus. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3 says, "He, Jesus, is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature." Putting these texts together, we see that Jesus perfectly represents God to us. Do you want to know what God is like, my friends? You want to know God's character and his instincts and his ways, then look to Jesus, because Jesus shows us God's holiness. Jesus shows us God's righteousness. Jesus shows us God's mercy and love and grace. As you read of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, you see God's very essence on display in the person and work of his Son. So do you want to know God's will for your life? You don't need any magic dice. Read what Jesus said and did. Jesus will show you God's will. If you found Jesus, you've found God. Now, this is especially good news in our culture, where we are often told that no one should be making truth claims. We're often told that truly knowing God is impossible. We're told the truth is unknowable because we're all situated, right? And we all have a limited perspective. And so we can grope around in the dark, but anything that we do know of God is just partial and subjective, right? That's our culture. Reminds me of that little parable of the blind men and the elephant. Have you ever heard this one? There was 6 blind men who had never seen an elephant with their eyes, okay, and they're blind, so but they encounter an elephant and they touch him at various parts. And so depending on what they touched, they thought that's what it was. One man holds the elephant's ear and he says, "Oh, I know what this is. It's a fan." Another guy wraps his arm around the elephant's trunk and he's like, no, guys, this is a giant snake." Another of them is touching the side of the elephant and says, clearly, this is a huge wall. Another of the blind men holds the tail and he goes, no, guys, this is just a rope. Now, the parable speaks to quite a bit of truth. It's true, ironically enough, that our knowledge of things is limited. We have limited perspectives. But let me ask you this. What if all those blind men holding all those parts of the elephant were suddenly to be given sight? Do you see that in an instant they would see, this is an elephant? It's not in that moment that they had discovered the truth, but the truth would be revealed to them because they could see. Well, my friends, Christianity claims not that we discover God through our own efforts as we try to feel various parts of the elephant, as it were. Christianity claims that Christ comes and reveals God to us. Christ turns the lights on. He is the light. Jesus radiates God's glory in such a way that blind hearts are made to really see God through him. And when we look at Jesus with the eyes of our heart, we behold the divine. He really does represent the fullness of God. Now, before we move on, I want to speak to some of you that are in a unique position in this church. I'm convinced that there's some of you, maybe just a small handful, who come week by week and you know the gospel, but you don't believe it. And you wish you did. And you know the truth of it. You know how God created us to have a relationship with him. And you know that bit about how our sin and rebellion has distanced us from God and incurs his judgment. You know the gospel message that God sent his son Jesus to live a perfect life, die on the cross in payment for our sins. He rose back to life, and now he offers for any who will turn and trust in him. He offers forgiveness of sins and eternal life. You know it. You know the truth of the gospel. But here's the thing. You don't believe it, and you wish you did, and you wonder what you can do next to sort of light your own faith on fire, to make it so that your own heart would be strangely warmed, as it were. Well, here's what I want to suggest to you in light of this doctrine of Jesus. Spend some time in the way of Jesus. Look at Jesus. In fact, I want to encourage you to take the 21-day challenge, if that's you, all right? Spend 21 days looking square in the face of Jesus. The Gospel of John actually has 21 chapters in it. And so I just encourage you, if that's where you are, go a day at a time, and every single day read one chapter of the Gospel of John, and as you read, ask this one question: who is Jesus? And read, listen, reflect, hear his words spoken to you, watch as he acts in that gospel. And here's what I suspect. If you're willing to sit with Jesus for 21 days in a row asking who he is, Jesus himself will reveal to you the very nature of God. And he will fill you with faith to believe. So, if that's you, take the 21-day challenge. I encourage you to do that. Hey, what do you got to lose? You see, Jesus represents God to his people. So if we look at Jesus, we can find God. That's the first thing that Jesus does as our high priest. But secondly, I want you to see that Jesus also represents his people to God. Jesus represents us, his people, to God. Now, here's the thing. The high priest of Israel represented the Israelite people to God. As he went into God's presence, it's like he was taking them with him because he was their representative. Now, there's all kinds of symbolism on the clothing that tells us this beautiful truth. First of all, you'll notice, remember that there was two beautiful onyx stones that were to be selected, and one stone was to be placed on each of the shoulders of the high priest. Furthermore, engraved into each stone was to be the names of the tribes of Israel. 6 tribes and their names engraved into one stone on one shoulder, 6 of the names of the other tribes engraved onto the stone of the other shoulder. Look at verse 12 where it's described. We read there, "And you shall set the 2 stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel, and Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord on his two shoulders for a remembrance. So here's the idea. The high priest was literally carrying the nation of Israel on his shoulders into the presence of the Lord. And then what he did before God's presence, it was as though the entire nation was with him. And you'll notice that word remembrance in the text. Remembrance. God would remember, that is, recognize the entire nation of Israel as he interacted with that high priest. The high priest represented them before God. He carried them on his shoulders with him. Then I want you to notice another thing in our text. Remember that there were also 12 individual stones of different kinds placed on the breastpiece. Remember that? Well, look what the text tells us about those. Verse 29. And Aaron shall bear the names of the sons of Israel in the breastpiece of judgment on his heart when he goes into the holy place to bring them to regular remembrance before the Lord. See, each and every one of those 12 stones had the name of an individual tribe of Israel etched into it. One stone per tribe. Do you know how special that would be if you were an everyday Israelite? Because as an Israelite, we don't get this as Americans really, but it was all about what tribe you were from, right? And they would think to themselves, my tribe is represented by one of those stones. I see myself in that stone. I am represented by my high priest before the Lord as he goes into God's holy presence. And I want you to notice the high priest was to carry those jewels over his heart, the text tells us. So the high priest carried the people over his heart, showing that their lives were actually bound up with his very life as he went before God. I also want you to notice that the stones were very valuable, right? These were precious stones. These were treasures. God's people are valuable to him. As Exodus 19:5 puts it, God says, you shall be my treasured possession. So here's what's going on here. The high priest represented these people in God's presence as a treasure. And he went about all of his duties of offering sacrifices and burning incense and lighting candles and changing the sacrificial bread and directing the other priests. And as the high priest did all of that stuff, he carried God's precious people over his heart, represented by those jewels. The high priest represented every single Israelite. In fact, the very status of the high priest was given to the people as he represented them. Right? He wore that turban with a thing on the front that said, holy to the Lord. Well, the high priest was holy because he went through all of these elaborate purification ceremonies to make him ritually holy, offering various sacrifices, going through various anointings and washings and so on and so forth. You can read about it in Exodus 29. But now, as he represents the people before God, it's like they're holy too because they're attached to him as he approaches God. All right, again, take a step back with me then. And think with me about how all of this points us to Jesus Christ and what he now does for us, brothers and sisters. I would assume that those of you who are Christians are deeply familiar with the fact that Jesus Christ is our needed substitute and sacrifice. But do you realize also that you need Jesus Christ to be your representative before God? You need Jesus as a high priest to permanently represent you before God as forgiven and holy. And we see this in the high priestly role of Jesus, having died on the cross, risen to life, and ascended into heaven, into the heavenly tabernacle, if you will. Jesus presented himself to the Father as our permanent representative. Even now this morning, Jesus stands in the presence of God the Father on behalf of all of God's people. Our lives are somehow bound up with his. We're like jewels on his robe. You know, the place you go to see this most thoroughly is the book of Hebrews. This idea of Jesus, our high priest, serving as our representative. Let me just show you a handful of passages from Hebrews. First from Hebrews 9, 11 through 12. We read that when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, speaking of heaven at that point, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. This passage is emphasizing the marvelous fact that Jesus Christ is both the sacrifice that we need, he's also the priest that brings his own sacrifice into the presence of God. Notice from Hebrews 10, every priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never actually take away sins. But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, waiting for the time when his enemies will be made a footstool for his feet. For by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. This text emphasizes a contrast. Human priests always stood as they did their work. Their work was never done. They had to offer sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice. In the case of Jesus, having offered the perfect sacrifice himself, he goes into heaven, and what does he do? He sits down, people, because his work is finished. Notice on the next text, Hebrews chapter 7. Former priests, they were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But Jesus holds his priesthood permanently. Come on, that's really good news if he's your priest. Because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Those verses show us that Jesus' saving work and his high priestly work are permanent. God will never change his mind about what he has done for us in Christ. God will never say, oh, just kidding, didn't mean to forgive her, didn't mean to forgive him. No. We are fully and finally and permanently forgiven because Jesus is forever there as a monument to what has been done for us on the cross. Here's how we can sum this up. As our substitute, Christ died for us in our place. As our representative, Christ takes us with him in everything that he does. So God sees our lives somehow as bound up with Christ once we believe in him. It's like we died with Christ. We were risen with Christ. We ascended with Christ. And now we're with him as he represents us in heaven as our high priest. So if I could put it into the language of the Exodus high priest that we read about earlier, it's like Jesus carries you and me on his shoulders as jewels. It's like your name and mine, brothers and sisters, are actually on the clothing of Jesus as another one of those beautiful jewels that he carries over his heart. Your name is etched into those stones because you're one of his, and he represents you. And just like Jesus, your priest is holy unto the Lord. Because you're connected up with him, you're now permanently holy unto the Lord because he represents you fully and finally and permanently. What we're talking about here is the doctrine of representation. The doctrine of representation. It means that Christ represents us in all that he does. It's no wonder that Romans 6 can tell us that we died with Christ. It's no wonder that Ephesians 2 can tell us we were made alive together with Christ, and we were raised up with Christ, and we've been seated with Christ in the heavenly places. Our lives are bound up with his, and he fully represents us. We are like jewels on his gown. Even now, brothers and sisters, as we sit here in this sanctuary hearing a sermon, Christ is seated in the heavenly places next to the Father, and he's representing you. He's representing you. So maybe you're wondering, well, like, how does this theology then affect the way that I relate to God in my everyday life? Well, let me ask you, is there anybody in this room who's a Christian, but you also sometimes feel insecure about your relationship with God? Anybody been there? I mean, it's one of the big, open secrets of the Christian life that sometimes we doubt, sometimes we struggle, sometimes we feel very insecure before God. And if that's you, brother, if that's you, sister, this morning, what I encourage you to do is look with the eyes of your heart to your great high priest, Jesus Christ, because he's wearing you like a jewel on his robe. He's fully representing you as a part of his people. He's displaying for the Father, and the Father delights to see it, that you are holy with Jesus. You're righteous with Jesus. You're accepted with Jesus. You're loved in and through and by Jesus. And so when you doubt about God's affection for you, when you go through those insecurities, think of Jesus, your great high priest. I wonder, is there anybody in here who's weary in your fight against sin? You're in the fight, your dukes are up, but you're tired. You feel so guilty and ashamed because sometimes the fight against sin seems so long. And sometimes you struggle against that same old sin and you wonder, could I possibly be forgiven for the 10 billionth time by God? Maybe I've finally reached my expiration date of forgiveness. And you just wonder. If that's you, brother, if that's you, sister, I encourage you, look to your high priest, Jesus Christ, because he stands before the Father on your behalf, giving evidence to the fact that you are, in fact, fully and finally forgiven. So repent of your sin and cling to your high priest before God. I love the lyrics of that great hymn, Before the Throne of God Above. It's all about Jesus, our high priest. Verse 2 puts it this way. It says, when Satan tempts me to despair and tells me of all the guilt within, upward I look and I see him there who made an end of all my sin. Because the sinless Savior died, my sinful soul is counted free. For God the just is satisfied to look on him and pardon me. And that's what God does in our lives, brothers and sisters. He looks on him and pardons us, looks on him and pardons us, looks on him and pardons us. We come and we confess our sin again and again and again. God can supply us endless forgiveness. Why? Because full and final payment has already been made through the sacrificial work of his Son, and Jesus is there, a perpetual reminder of that. And still I wonder, is there anyone here who sometimes wonders if God really cares, or if you really can pray to him, if he really listens? Again, to you, I would remind you of your high priest, because part of the doctrine of the high priest of Jesus is meant to show us that he goes into the presence of God so that we can follow him there in prayer. Hebrews tells us about this, as the next screen will show. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. This text would encourage us, brothers and sisters, to have confidence. There is no prayer request that's too big for God to handle. And there is no prayer request that's too small for God to care about. He cares about it all, and we go to him through our high priest, Jesus Christ. So here's what I encourage you to do in your prayer life. This is just a marvelous way to pray. As you go to God the Father in prayer, picture going to him through Jesus, your great high priest. Picture Jesus there sitting at the right hand of the Father. And as you begin your prayers, picture Jesus smiling at you, welcoming you into God's presence. Picture the Father also smiling as you come before him. Don't just pray to the Father, but pray with Jesus to the Father. You see, our high priest, Jesus, represents God to his people, yes, and Jesus also represents his people to God. And we should take full advantage of those realities. But I want you to see one final thing, brothers and sisters. One final thing that Jesus does as our great high priest, and that is Jesus intercedes for God's people. Jesus intercedes for God's people. Look, just when you thought it couldn't get any better than this, I'm here to tell you, Jesus Christ is praying for you personally. See, one major function of the high priest was to pray for the people. As he went about his duties, he was effectively praying for them, not only through his words and the inclinations of his heart, but the very deeds that the high priest did were an act of prayer. As he walked before God with those jewels, it was like he was bringing the people before God in prayer, reminding God of their needs. As he offered those animal sacrifices, it was a way of praying for the forgiveness of sins, right? As he offered up that incense and it went up into the air, it represented prayer. The high priest was to pray for the people. And here's the most amazing reality about Jesus. Jesus, as your high priest, prays for you in your Christian life. The author of Hebrews again brings this out. Hebrews 7:25. We read that Jesus is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Intercession means prayer. Or take Romans 8, verse 34, where Paul says the same thing. Christ Jesus is the one who died, more than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. This should give you chills. Jesus, our high priest, is praying for us. Look, it's good to have a prayer partner. It's good to have lots of prayer partners. But is it not amazing that Jesus offers himself as your prayer partner? He always prays in line with God's will. That's the kind of prayer partner I want. He's up there in heaven praying for you. You say, what's he praying for? Well, I was really helped by one Christian scholar, F.F. Bruce, who makes the point that if we want to figure out what Jesus is praying for in heaven, let's just look at how he prayed on earth. Remember that time when Peter was about to deny Jesus 3 times? And he's like, no, that's not going to happen to me. And you know what Jesus said to Peter? He said, Peter, I'm praying for you. Look, I'll show you this on the screen. Luke 22:31, Jesus says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat, but I've prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. So Jesus is like, I'm aware that Satan's going to come and he's going to actually try to sift you. And that's going to happen when you deny me. But I prayed for you, Peter, and I'm praying that your faith is going to be strengthened. You're going to make it. And you're going to be so strong in the end that you're going to help others. And guess what? Jesus' prayer was answered, right? Peter denied Christ, but then he was restored, and his faith was stronger than ever, and he led the way. I think of all the ways that Jesus prayed in his earthly ministry in John 17. The entire chapter is often called the high priestly prayer of Jesus. And if you read that chapter later, I encourage you to do so, you'll find that Jesus prays for his people that they would persevere. He prays that they would be unified. He prays that they would have joy. He prays that they would be protected from the evil one. He prays that they would be sanctified, that they would be a witness to the world, that they would experience the depth of God's love. And so here's the amazing thing, brothers and sisters. Jesus is still actively praying for those kind of things in your life and mine even now. So there you are, facing some temptation. The Lord Jesus Christ is up in heaven. He's praying for you that you would have the strength to persevere and fight that sin. There you are. You're sick in bed in the hospital. And Jesus Christ is up in heaven. He's praying for you that not only will you suffer well, but that you will radiate his glory to everybody who serves you on that hospital bed. And there you are. You're struggling in some relationship, struggling to forgive. And there's Jesus, your great high priest. He's praying that you will let go of that grudge. And there you are, you're going through a season of doubt, and there's Jesus, just like Peter, going through a season of doubt. And there's Jesus praying for you, just like he prayed for Peter, that your faith would be strong. Jesus is praying you forward in your Christian life. You say, why do I keep moving forward? 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. Sometimes it's a bumpy ride, but overall, I seem to be progressing in my sanctification. Why does that happen? Even if it happens ever so slowly, here's why. Because Jesus is praying you forward in your Christian life. Come to think of it, have you ever wondered how it is that the Bible can promise that all of those who are truly saved will, in fact, persevere to the end? Well, here's one reason. Because all of those who are truly saved have a high priest who is constantly praying for them. Not only does he save us through the sacrifice of his own body on the cross, but then he prays for us every step of the way in our Christian lives. He sustains us by his prayers all the way to the finish line. So are you discouraged today? Picture Jesus praying for you. Do you need hope today? Picture Jesus praying for you. Do you need strength? Picture Jesus, your great high priest, praying for you. You know, we've all heard the phrase, you are what you wear. You are what you wear. The way people dress gives strong clues about who they really are, okay? Well, with Jesus, that statement, you are what you wear, that statement is more true than we know. And here's the thing, what does Jesus wear? He wears us. Our great high priest, Jesus, dares to dress himself with us. We are the jewels on that robe. He wears us as he represents us before the Father. Therefore, he forever associates himself with the likes of us. And so his holiness, his righteousness, his purity, his faithfulness, they're ours forever. Brothers and sisters, in light of all of this, today, let's look to Jesus, our great high priest. He reveals God to us. He represents us to God. And he's praying us forward in our life with him. See, he's the priest we really need. And here's the thing. We have him forever. If you got pain, he's a pain taker.